In 1952, my dad decided we should take a big trip to Alaska. Now, Alaska wasn't a state yet, so it was a really big deal to go to Alaska. We drove from Laverne, California, our house, up to Vancouver, and we then got on the Princess Kathleen, which was a ship that goes up the Inside Passage. It's nothing like they do today, but there was this one ship that went through there, and it was the Kathleen. We got off in Skagway. Now, our family did, and another couple families did, but most people stayed on the ship, and it turned around and went back the same way it came. A side story is that it ran into the wall. It ran into the land and pretty well ruined the ship and sunk on its way back from our trip. So we were kind of lucky not to have to go through that. In the meantime, we were in Skagway. Now, Skagway is still the starting point of where people that would go to the gold rush in Alaska would start, because that they would go up the Inside Passage and get off of a ship, or however they got there, the train, at Skagway. And then they made their way up to the Yukon Territory, where there was gold. So Skagway was quite a big deal, is quite a big deal for the history of that area. We stayed in Skagway for a couple days, and then we got on a narrow gauge railroad, and we went up to Whitehorse. No, I take that all back. We left Skagway and we got on the Yukon River, and we went up on a paddle wheel riverboat so far, and then our riverboat broke down. Clear out in the middle of the Yukon Territory. We weren't in Alaska, we were just out in the boondocks. What we could see from the ship was some Indian huts and a lot of river. There was a priest on board, and he kind of gathered all of the children, and I was considered one of the children, and he went to the kitchen and got us bacon and cheese and whatnot, and put some fishing poles together, and we caught 64 Yukon grayling in just a matter of minutes. And that is on the menu. Somewhere I have that in all of my junk stuff, is a menu from that ship, and it's a grilled Yukon grayling with lemon tips that the ship cooked for everybody that night. It was really fun. Well, it was quite fun when you fish, to just pull in a fish about every time you put down something to eat, for them to eat, and it was mostly bacon and cheese. So they'll eat anything, and the fish were big, they were great. But that was being stuck on the Yukon River. Well, since there were about 8 or 9 of us on board that had reservations for a bus to meet them in, to take us over the tundra, if you will, to Fairbanks, we had to get off that ship. So they got us off that ship, and we were really, literally in the middle of nowhere. And pretty soon an old broken down school bus came and got us. And yes, indeed, a bus came and got us and took us over that. There were really no roads a lot of the places, just dirt places. And we got to Dawson City, and got on a bush plane. My family did. I don't know where all the rest went. And I had my first really major airplane ride in a bush plane from Dawson, Yukon Territory, to Fairbanks, Alaska in July of 1952 at about 11:30 at night, and it was bright sunlight, which was amazing to me that that's what happens. Patty and I went to a movie in Fairbanks, and they let us say, you just come back to the hotel at night. Well, it was bright as it is right now at 11:30 at night, and at midnight they hardly have any dark. I guess it gets kind of dusky about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, but it really was bright out, and which was kind of fun for kids at that age to be running around the streets. In Fairbanks, we went out. I remember seeing this humongous polar bear stuffed at the country club in Fairbanks, and it must have stood 9 or 10 feet tall. And that was a really big deal to me, to see that they could stand on 2 feet that big. It was mammoth. And then we got on the train and we went south. We were going towards Anchorage. And we went through Denali National Park, and on that day, which Denali isn't visible a lot, we saw the mountain. I can see it as clear as day right now in my mind's eye. It was beautiful. And somewhere, if there are some moving pictures in the garage, I think, there's a picture of Mount Denali in Alaska in 1952. And so we took the train down. We got off at Denali, and I took a sled with dog sleds ride. They were the Malamutes that they used at that particular place. Beautiful. I always fell in love with the Malamute dog, thinking that's what I needed when I grew up. Well, I haven't had one yet, but they are beautiful. They have the blue eyes. And so Denali was quite nice. And then we continued on down to Anchorage. And we stayed in Anchorage, I don't know, probably a week, until we flew out from Anchorage to Vancouver and drove back to San Dimas. So that I think we were gone about a month. Dad always fixed his schedule real estate-wise that we could go that long. If he was waiting for an escrow closing or closed and then we'd go or whatever, all of our trips were planned around his schedule. But I do think we probably had to be gone that long. And Mother has this thing about, well, if you're going that many miles, you better stay and see it all. So if she was paying for that much, then we went longer and we stayed and we saw it all. That's what we did the next year. In 1954, so 2 years, we went to Hawaii the same way. Now, backtrack a little bit. I went to school from kindergarten to 8th grade at San Dimas Grammar School. So in 8th grade, I graduated, and they had a pretty big ceremony. And I note this because I gave the speech. I was the one who sat in the middle of the front row and gave the speech at my 8th grade graduation. I had won the Kiwanis public speaking contest, and then later on I won the Lions Club had speaking contests, and I entered those and won them for about 3 years in a row. So I was the public speaker at my 8th grade graduation, and 4 years later I actually was the speaker at my 12th grade graduation too. So I have a big mouth and I like to talk a lot. You know, we didn't have junior highs, what you do, or middle schools. I just went straight to the 8th grade, and there was not a difference between one and the other. But when we graduated from 8th grade, it was a big deal. I went to Bonita High School, which was a school that took care of San Dimas, Laverne, and Laverne Heights. Now those towns all have their own high school, but in those days we were Bonita Union High School, and I don't know if they used Laverne or San Dimas as their address. I suspect it was Laverne. So I went into high school, and it was so different for me to be from a regular classroom with a teacher and everybody in the class to actually having periods of so many minutes and meeting new kids. I did not know the kids from Laverne, so the kids from San Dimas and Laverne mixed in high school, so I had a lot new friends in 9th grade. Glenda Thomas, that you've heard me speak of, was one of my best friends that I met. But she married Dale Thomas, who I went to school with since kindergarten. So that's how we all mixed. And so high school was a whole new cup of tea for me. My sister and I were never in high school at the same time because she was 5 years older. So when I went into high school as a freshman, I really didn't know anybody older. A little note there is that Bill Wynn, who was later my husband, was a senior in high school when I was a freshman. And all the girls thought he was the cutest guy in school. And I think he was voted the cutest guy in school. And actually, he was the closest neighbor that I had. So I did know who he was even when I was a freshman. Every girl in school knew who Bill Wynn was at any time. He was a cutie pie. But I didn't date him until I was after my sophomore year. He called and asked me out. He says, he said, do you know who this is? And I said, no. And he says, don't you even know your known neighbors? And he was the only one I could think of, and I'm like, he's not going to ask me out. But then he said he was Bill Wynn, and I asked Dad if I could go out with him, and he says, oh, is that Pete's son? Everybody calls Cecil Wynn Pete. And I said, yes, it is. And he said, sure, you can go out with him. I don't know how I felt about that about 3 years later, but at that time, he said I could go out with him. And that was in my sophomore year of high school. And let's see, the sophomore year of high school was freshman year of high school, 1952. 1954 would have been the next year. We went to Hawaii. And that was awesome. We went over on the Lurleen, big steamship in those days. I don't think it exists now. And we went into Honolulu, and my dad rented an apartment right down 3 blocks from Waikiki Beach. And we stayed there a month. And in the meantime, we went to Molokai and Maui and Kauai and the Big Island of Hawaii. And I want y'all to know, in those days, there was nothing there but a small hotel on all of them. We did stay in a hotel, but they were nothing fancy. But it was awesome to be able to see those islands when they were that way and not built up with a lot of big hotels. They were all beautiful with the pineapple growing and the sugar cane growing. And I feel so lucky that I was able to see it at that time. Even Waikiki Beach, there was 5 hotels on the beach. That's all. It was so beautiful. And when I was the first time we went in 1954, like, we were staying at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel until we could move into the apartment that Dad had rented. And at that time I met a friend named John Bond. Another girl from the ship was there, and we were looking at these guys playing football on the lawn at the Royal Hawaiian. We thought they were mighty cute. And so we waited, and they came over and introduced themselves, and I met John, and Carolyn met I can't remember who. And it was so fun because we went to the beach at night when there was only 5 hotels on Waikiki, so you could walk beyond the hotels, and the Beach Boys would sing and play the ukuleles at night. And we were way too young for that. The college kids might go over there, but we were young high school kids. And we would be way at the edge, but we were listening to them. Oh, I thought that was the most romantic thing of my whole life. And still, my memory says that was the most romantic thing I had ever felt. You know, it was just awesome. I still hear from John Bond. He lives in the Bay Area, We've been friends since 1954. When I was 14, he was 16. So let's see, that puts me in a sophomore year of high school. And that's high school. I was participated in a lot of stuff. I was elected cheerleader. I was cheerleader for the whole time I was in high school. And I was in the Girls Athletic Association. I was a swimmer. I was a public speaker. I won those contests I spoke about earlier. I did a lot of socializing, you see. That's why I didn't pay too much attention to school. I was much more interested in my socialization. And yes, I think I had a boyfriend from kindergarten, and that continued on through high school. I pretty well always had a boyfriend. I do remember all of them. They were awfully cute, and that was a fun time for me. My house was right next door to the school. I say next door, it was through an orange grove, and then my house. So I walked to and from school. I was probably the only person in Bonita High School that lived that close. Well, I was the only person, and everybody would see me walking out there. I couldn't get away with much because everybody saw me do whatever I was doing. But it was kind of fun. I really liked it, and I did that all through high school. And then I get to my junior year. And is that about enough for now? Okay.